It's past for starting time, and we have some of the people at the convention here who have agreed to help us as a demonstration square if we need one. So they're going to be ready in case we need to have some people help us with a demonstration square. I don't want to wait any longer before we get this session underway, because we will need to stop on time whether we get started on time or not. Come on up, and appreciate your help very, very much. For those of you who have come to this session, this is a panel discussion on teaching for dancing pleasure, or for dancer pleasure, whichever of those words you prefer. And starting us off this afternoon, we're going to have a presentation by Herb Egender on techniques for motivating learners and on conditions which allow reward systems to effectively encourage learning. Now, as a procedure, I'm going to ask you to make notes or jot down any questions you might have to save until all three presentations are ended. We'll have about 20 minutes for each of the three presentations. Then we'll have time for discussion from the floor and questions, and we would like to deal with them at that time. Okay, here's Herb Egender.
Thank you, Jack. Immediately after lunch is not one of my favorite times to try to keep people awake, but we'll do our best. And if I were going to choose a subject, I'd probably choose another one to keep people awake, because what I want to talk about is, in some places, a bit academic perhaps, but I think it's important. If I have had the privilege of doing clinics for any of you people out there, you'll say, well, this is the same old pitch, and you're exactly right. I have found no reason to change it. Until somebody convinces me otherwise, I'll continue to use it. I think in teaching square dancing that we make two assumptions which I think are false assumptions. Number one, we assume, or we seem to assume, that because one can call square dances, he or she can also teach. And I submit that's a bunch of baloney. There are some excellent callers around this country who can't teach you anything. There are other callers who would have trouble getting any kind of a club date who are turning out some of our best students because they're good teachers. The other assumption that we seem to make, or that I observed in square dancing, is that square dancing is so different from anything else that we do, and we're always talking about how great and how different it is, that square dancing is so different from anything else that we do that we can perform miracles in square dancing. And we can teach people very complicated geographic memory patterns and choreographic patterns in short periods of time, where we wouldn't think about making the same kinds of claims if we were teaching arithmetic or flying an airplane or something of that nature. And I submit to you that square dancing, in terms of why people learn, is not that different from mathematics or flying an airplane. So I think both of those assumptions are false, and I think they get us into a great deal of trouble in teaching, period, and especially in teaching for pleasure. In looking into this subject, I ask myself, how do people derive pleasure from what they do? What gives them pleasure? I think there are a couple of things. I think people derive pleasure from what they do if they are successful at it. And what they do might be very easy or it might be very difficult. But if they are successful at it, I think, generally speaking, they derive pleasure from it. They enjoy it. The other reason I think people derive pleasure from what they do is because of their motivation. And I know I have watched children at play, sometimes digging into a sandbank or something that is really strenuous labor, and they're just working their heads off. really hard work. But they're having a ball because for some reason they're motivated to do that particular thing, to make that cave or something. I think some of the old barn raising stories that we hear about where people are out just working 12, 14, 16 hours a day to raise a barn. Really hard work, but they were having pleasure and enjoying it because they had a particular kind of motivation for that. So I suggest to you that people derive pleasure from what they're doing if they're successful and if they're motivated. That brings me to the point of that term, motivation, and I suggest to you that people learn because of motivation, or they do not learn for lack of motivation. And that brings me into the field that I want to talk about, and that's motivation and learning. And I say that this applies whether we're talking about mathematics, flying an airplane, or square dancing. They aren't that different in terms of why people learn or do not learn. Let's ask ourselves, what is learning? What is learning? The behavioral definition of learning would be something that goes along the lines of it's a change in behavior as a result of experience. A change in behavior as a result of experience. And when we talk about learning, it becomes kind of interesting to ask ourselves, how do I know if people have learned? Because I can look at you now as you sit there after lunch with your eyelids drooping, and I don't know whether you are learning anything at all. When we give the written examination at the end of this hour, then I will have an idea. And the point is that we do not directly observe learning. I don't really know what's going on in your mind. So the only way I can say that you have learned or not learned is to get some kind of feedback. For that reason, I'm always suspicious when I hear a caller say, I taught my dancers 4 new basics last night. Because I suspect if I put those dancers on the floor and observed their behavior or their supposed change in behavior, that statement might be subject to some question. Or I hear round dance leaders say, I taught my dancers 4 new dances last night. And I find that very suspect, because you can't look at your dancers and say, yes, I taught them this, or they have learned this. You have to get some kind of feedback. We do not directly observe learning, and that's an important concept for us as teachers to realize. We need that feedback. And that feedback can come to us in many ways, in terms of facial expressions, body movements, not just the execution of the figures, but in many other ways. That feedback can come to us perhaps through our partner who says, hey, knock it off, slow down. This is a time to coast. This is a time to have fun. This is a time to put that pleasure that you're talking about into teaching. Now, just think about this. When we talk about learning being a change in behavior as a result of experience, consider what we're trying to do in many cases. We're trying to cause some really drastic changes in behavior. We're trying to take a person with 2 left feet, I'm talking about the man, of course, who has been dragged down into the hall by his wife. You look out on the sidewalk and there are heel marks for a block. And we are trying to take this individual and transform him from that condition into one who can dance smoothly a very complicated figure such as spin chain through at the mainstream level. That's a terrific behavior change. Not only that, we're trying to get him to do it to the music and step on the beat and shuffle and all those other things. That's a big, big, big change. And so we have to be very careful to judge when and if learning has occurred. Now, if that individual is really motivated, that learning will occur more quickly. It's more apt to occur. If he's not motivated, you're going to have a heck of a time teaching him because he will not be interested. And all too often we try to motivate people simply by saying the magic words, square dancing is fun. We all know that. Well, that's not much motivation for this guy that's just been dragged into the hall. And he needs something more than that. So how do we go about motivating people? How do you motivate people? Let me suggest, first of all, it's a good idea perhaps to find out what their motivations are. I try to always do this in caller schools. Why do you want to be a caller? Do you like to sing? Do you like to be in the spotlight? Do you think you would like the applause? You want to get rich like these two guys up here? Yeah. Well, I knew it didn't include me, but I was. So what is your motivation? I think sometimes it's good to know from our dancers what is their motivation. It might affect how they learn. You know, we have a very mobile society nowadays, and we worry a great deal because we lose people. I suggest to you that in our society we have a very large group of people who are simple social experimenters. This winter it's karate, and next winter it's bowling, and 2 winters from now they plan square dancing. And they have no intention whatsoever of becoming a nut like you are and square dance for 10 years. And they might be hard to change, and it might help you to know that that is their motivation. They're looking for something to do that particular winter because they've got something else planned the next winter. It might help you to know that the husband is there under protest simply because he says, "Okay, honey, I'll go one night if you shut up and leave me alone." It might help you to know that that young lady is there because she has been given the job in her school of teaching youngsters to dance, and she thought maybe she could come and learn something from you. All of those people will learn for different reasons and at different rates and learn different kinds of material better than they learn other kinds of material. So I would suggest it's not bad just to go around and say, "Hey, nice to have you. What brought you in here? And what are you interested? Why are you here?" etc. Then when we talk about motivating people, we ask ourselves, how can I motivate them so that they will learn and so that they can have fun learning? Because if I do motivate them and they're working toward a goal and they really do believe that square dancing is fun and that's enough motivation, then they'll have pleasure learning. They'll have pleasure learning. And we usually motivate people how? With some kind of reward, don't we? With some kind of reward. We reward them for their behavior or their performance. To keep it simple, there are basically two kinds of rewards. One is positive and one is negative. And the positive, of course, is the pat on the back, and the negative is the pat someplace else or the kick someplace else. Which is most effective? I think, which is most effective? Certainly, the positive is more effective. We've got all kinds of old sayings that honey catches more flies than vinegar, etc., etc. Positive is much more effective. Which lasts longer? Let me ask you this: when you come to CALLERLAB and you see some people you haven't seen for a long time, and you get together and you start just yakking about old times and so forth, what do you talk about? Huh? Yeah, the good times, don't you? That's what comes to mind. You say, "Gosh, you remember that time Harry was calling his tip and so forth," and you have a bunch of laughs and yaks. And doesn't mean you've forgotten some of the bad times, but the first thing you think about when you get together a group. So those are the things that are on the surface, and the positive motivation is much more effective, it's much longer lasting, and it does us much more good than the negative motivation. And sometimes we give that negative motivation without meaning to, and we have to be very careful, because negative motivation is not only counterproductive, but it takes the pleasure out of learning. And when we say, "John, you really messed up that square through," we've kind of ruined John's evening or week or something. because his wife has probably already told him, and he's mad anyhow. So we try to avoid the negative kinds of rewards, if you want to call them rewards, and use the positive, which is more effective and longer lasting. Now, if we're going to use a reward system, and I suggest that we do by saying to the dancers, gee, that was a good job, even if it was a terrible job, I think you can always find a way to say, that was really a good job on that swing through. I noticed on the part there where we had the centers run around the ends, we had a little bit of difficulty. The thing that people remember will be that the first thing you said was positive. And this has been proven in many cases. There's some very good stories, none of which I will repeat here. But I think you can always take the positive approach even when you're trying to make a correction or when something is wrong, rather than take the negative approach. All right, let me move on because I think I'm about out of time. People who study motivation and learning, on why people learn, on giving people pleasure in learning, tell us that if we are going to use a system of rewards, any kind of system of rewards, that 4 conditions must exist if that system is going to be effective. And these 4 conditions, I think, are very important to us in square dancing. They're very important in all fields of learning, but they're particularly, I think, applicable to us in square dancing. The first condition is, the very first condition. I said, the very first condition is, I woke somebody up, is that you have to get the person's attention. Now, it does no good to offer somebody a reward if you don't have his or her attention, because he doesn't know what you're talking about. And I think quite often in our classes, we kid ourselves. We say, yeah, sure, I have the class's attention. I have the microphone, and they're looking at me, their eyes are open, and I think they're listening. But you may not have their attention. You may have all of the outward signs of attention, but the guy might be thinking that he's really wondering if the insurance company is going to pay for that fender they mashed this afternoon. Or, as Bob Howell, he's wondering about his daughter coming home with a Gideon Bible. So you may or may not have his attention, and you need to be very careful to discover whether or not you do, and you can do this in subtle ways by testing reactions. Secondly, in any reward system, it seems fundamental, in any reward system, you need to offer something that the individual being rewarded wants. Something he wants. See, I could ask one of you in this audience to, if you just simply stand up out of your chair, I'd give you a handful of mud or a pint of castor oil or something. And you'd say, well, I'm not getting up for that. It's totally inappropriate. And yet, don't we sometimes offer our dancers rewards that they don't really understand? And I go back to the phrase, hey, square dancing is fun. Well, you and I that have been dancing for a while, when we say that, that conjures up all kinds of things, doesn't it? It conjures up the part of the tradition of square dancing, the good times we've had, festivals we've been to, all these kinds of things. To a brand new dancer, the only fun he's seen in square dancing is beating his brains out for 4 nights so far, trying to get through whatever you're trying to teach him. And he says, you know, like that little sign, he says, are we having fun yet? So you have to, if the system is going to be effective, you have to give the individual something that he wants. A night off is a great reward. Just relax dancing. Maybe this is the night you don't teach anything. Maybe this is the night, you know, sometimes I think we have a lesson plan which is inflexible, and we think we have to check off 3 things a night or 4 things a night. X number of weeks divided into X number of basics, that equals so many per night, so each night I'm going to check off this many. And having checked off 4 this night, then I can say I taught my dancers 4 basics tonight. Hogwash. That's what happens, So you have to get the attention, you have to give something that is meaningful. Thirdly, let me offer anybody in this room, because I'm an equal opportunity offerer, anybody in this room for $1,000 cash. If you just simply step outside and without any mechanical assistance whatsoever, jump over the building, just come back in and I'll pay you. You know, nobody's moving. Did you notice? There he goes. He may know something I don't. If you step in a telephone booth and take off your coat, I'm obviously ridiculous. It's something you can't do, and yet we ask our dancers to do it all the time if we're not careful. We ask our dancers to do it in class, you know. We say, spin the top. And we wonder, gosh, I taught that the last 10 minutes last week. How come you're not doing it? The reason he or she is not doing it is that particular thing is not a part of his repertoire. It's not a part of his mental makeup. The message doesn't get into the computer and go through the system that signals the hands and the feet what to do. That's why he's not doing it. And we can tell him square dancing's fun and all these other things, but it doesn't make any difference, because we have asked him to do something that he cannot do. And no matter what reward system we offer, it's not going to make a bit of difference. And the whole system breaks down. The fourth principle, if a reward system is going to be effective, is a little term in case you want to write this down. You can go back over at the hotel, tell people that weren't here that we talked about temporal contiguity. That just means do it now. Do it now. I know it does not happen in any families in this audience, but I have heard stories where Johnny throws a rock through the window at noon, and Mother says, boy, wait till your daddy gets home. And Daddy gets home at 5 o'clock. Mother says, Johnny threw a rock through the window. Daddy says, come here, Johnny. Bang, 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 bang. Well, meantime, Johnny's climbed a tree and swung on a vine and waded the creek and chased a dog and one thing and another. And he's scratching his head and he said, boy, I wonder what the old man's beating me for. Because he's forgotten about the window a long time ago. And that negative reward probably is not effective. And it's silly for us if, to say, hey, Jack, last week in that third tip, you really did a good job on that square through. Jack is saying, last week, third tip. What's a tip? Yeah, he's probably saying, what's a square through? So, you know, if you want to give the guy the reward, say, hey, nice job right now that you did. So let me leave those thoughts with you. I'd like to get a square up and demonstrate them, but I don't know how. Because I'm talking about teaching per se. I'm not talking about teaching, I almost said teaching square dancing, and that's an incorrect term because we're not teaching square dancing. We're teaching people to square dance. And that's an awfully important word, people. And people learn or do not learn for the same reasons, whether it's square dancing or anything else. The primary reason is whether they're motivated or not. We can motivate them through a reward system, use positive rewards, but if the system's going to be effective, get their attention, give them something they want, ask them to do the possible, and do it now.
Guy that has a fantastic amount of experience both in square dancing and teaching and really working with people so you can understand. He knows a lot about the topic of motivation and of reinforcement and helping to work from that standpoint. We're going to switch a little bit on you and talk about a different aspect of helping people who are square dancing have a good time doing it. And one of the things John Marshall has been studying is what it is about calls and the way callers use them that makes them hard for dancers to do. So here's John Marshall.
Thank you, Jack. going to get all this money out from underneath my feet so I got a little room to move here. Well, you're giving it away $1,000 at a crack. It's no wonder you say we have all the money. The hardest thing about talking to you about what makes choreography or calls hard is only having 15 minutes in which to do it. But we try to get so many things handled, here, so many things we want to make you aware of. The idea about what makes choreography or calls hard is not necessarily a new idea. And I think back some time ago when we first started developing lists of programs, whatever term you want to apply, we felt that perhaps we were addressing that problem at the same time, or that question, let's say, at the same time. And a few of us began to wonder if that was necessarily true. And I'm going to tell you that calls do not necessarily a level make. How calls are presented, how they're put together, places in the square that they're used from, those things all combine to have to do to a degree of impact on your dancer's ability to react to them, to execute them. And this is a study that's going to take a long time to do, but there are some basic things that we've found that are readily understandable. And the idea has really come right now is the time for this idea to be explored, because we're doing so much now, we're searching so hard to find the answers to how to make things better, how to let the dancers win, how to handle the degree of choreographic sophistication that we've attained. And I'm not necessarily saying that term attained is a positive term. I'm saying it's something that seems to exist from where we were 25 years ago. It's here. How do we deal with it? And that's why more and more of us are studying and looking at this question. One of the things that I want to talk to you about, some of them seem obvious, and we can not dwell overly long on them. But, for example, I'm going to talk to you about timing just ever so briefly. If calls are poorly timed, and by that I mean if you rush a dancer through a call, if you stack calls too quickly beyond what he can retain as what was the next one I was supposed to do, when that dancer may very well be at a stage if he's trying to remember what the components of the given call that he's doing right now are, he's not prepared to deal with the next call and the call after that. And so how do we time our material to our dancers? And we have to time the delivery to our dancers, gearing it to what they as a floor are able to do at that given point in their development. And that changes, because you know on the very first night that you've taught the call right and left through, right? That you're certainly not going to be whipping out right and left through, pass through, bend the line, right and left through, stacking one behind the other and letting them look for these extra right and left throughs. They're thinking right pull by, extend to left, courtesy turn, if they know the call courtesy term is a separate term. That's what they're working on. So we adjust our timing on that. We don't clip time to the dancers. We don't shorten up the amount of time. We've got timing charts. We know how many beats these calls are allowed, and that's what they should be allowed. The dancer's ability, mentally, to reach out beyond the call that he's actually doing now comes a little at a time. Initially, left Alaman, they have to think all the way through left Alaman or do-so-do on the very first night. Later on, it's almost an automatic reaction. And we've all used that term, it'll become automatic. Well, it becomes automatic because of repetition and because we're talking about learning. And one of the things I'd like to touch on that Herb was talking about, learning and that change of behavior that they're going through. We often expose dancers to ideas. We often show them things, and we often walk away and say, I taught. I contend that you didn't teach necessarily. If they, in fact, learned, then you taught. But you exposed them to ideas. And so often we hear callers say, well, I can teach them this many things in this amount of time. And sure, I can get all the way through the list. And what they mean is they can expose these people to these ideas. That doesn't mean they've learned them. And there's a big marked difference there in the terms of the caller who's really teaching well. He makes sure that people are really learning. And it's a point to keep in the back of your mind. I'm going to move on from timing into talking about poor teaches. Poor teaching leaves a bit of a scar if a call is taught incorrectly or if your actual presentation of the call is done in such a way that the dancer is somewhat confused but he's kind of getting there with help of others pulling or saying no over here and working through. And he doesn't truly understand what's happening and doesn't see what's happening. That's a problem. If the call's been taught incorrectly, being done incorrectly, and later in his dance experience, the call's presented somehow differently to him than he's used to, and he's confused, and another caller may have to come back and undo what's been done. Deprogramming is much harder than doing it right the first time. And again, you're then trying to change an established behavior pattern that's been learned, even if it's been learned incorrectly. So we have to be very careful in our teaches. We often will cue dancers, and a confusing cue of where he is in spin chain through, if we're using the half right, center's left 3/4, and the new center's trade across, and so on. But if we've made that confusing for the dancer, that doesn't help. The whole idea of a cue is to be an aid, to be able to bring the dancer further along, make them more successful, and eventually you slowly begin to take that cue away until he now knows the pattern and he has the feel for the action. Mistimed cues is another thing that can make very difficult dancing for the dancers executing the calls. If you're giving the command to do a given call and the dancers start, and then you come back and you begin to cue that call after they're already into it, you'll have any number of dancers trying to do the cue in the middle of the call because they've already gotten past that part. Or the part you're cueing hasn't gotten there to them yet. You have to time your cues just as much as you time your calls. And that takes practice. It takes practice and experience. My big thing, if you will, in studying, the thing that I find that most often will break a floor faster than anything else is bad body flow. And to that end, I would say to you, I'd like to talk about what body flow means, because I've had a discussion recently with several callers, one who quite surprised me with the idea of body flow. Well, that's nothing but not doing 2 star threes in a row. And I said, no, that's hand usage. And he said, well, you dance with your hands. And I said, no, they dance with their minds and their whole bodies. And what we're talking about here is entirely different than simple matter of hand usage. What do we mean by body flow? What's happening? You know, what are the dynamics of body flow? It's a major study, all in and of itself. And I watched some of our finest, most exciting callers manage to do major things wrong. Not because they don't care, because they're habits, because they're things that we always do. And our biggest tendency, of course, as the ladies will attest, is that we do not concern ourselves nearly enough with their part. Most callers are men, and they tend to have an eye to the men's part. That's what they learned to dance. And we often will abuse the ladies' portion of the call, quite often, in terms of what call precedes or what call follows. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the body flow things, but let me give you a rather glaring example. And I would hope that nobody in the room has done this, but we have our dancers moving along right up to speed, having a good time, dancing to the music. Please let them be dancing to the music. Right? And we do our double pass through and centers in and bend the line. And this fellow's getting his teeth off the floor, right? And that one over there no longer has his BVDs, and somebody's got a back thrown out. And, you know, you think we're exaggerating, of course, in fun, but at the same time, watch what happens. The center's in action, that forward direct motion of the bodies. And I'm not yet even talking about how the dancers may have been programmed up to this point as to what to normally do next. I'm only talking about what's physically happening to the bodies on the floor. They're moving, the center dancers are moving forward to put centers in, and they back up to bend the line. Jarring, terrible. All right, not all of our body flow is that terrible, thank goodness. But we have so many pieces of body flow that are just a little bit bad. And we have some calls that have done as much as anything to lend themselves to bad body flow. Curly Q being my number one on my hit list. You know, if that call disappeared tomorrow, I'd be thrilled right down to the ground. There are ways to learn to use it effectively, but you have to really work at it, and it's limited, because what happens, the girls are doing a 3/4 turn to their left. How many other calls do you know that normally ask those ladies to go to their left? Sit down and look at it and think about it. You're not going to find a whole lot. So where you place the ladies before a curly cue is called, and what call is going to follow the curly cue becomes very critical if you're going to force yourself to use that call. If it's on the program and we say it's part of the program, therefore I will call it. Some of the actions that we talk about in body flow are more critical than others, some are less critical. But the point is, as a composite grouping, they all make a difference on the feel of the dance. Not necessarily a very scientific thing. What does it feel like? But how many times have you heard the dancers, or have you gone and danced to a caller with a good sense of timing and body flow, and you come away with, boy, that is so smooth, that is so nice, that is so comfortable. It's such a joy to dance that way. Well, part of what makes it that way is because one call goes into the next and to the next, and it's very comfortable and fun to do. It's not awkward or jerky. There's not a lot of recovering going on. But we're talking about what makes it hard. We're not talking about what makes it good. But obviously, let's get rid of what makes it hard, then it'll be better. And we'll take that run. But I'm looking at the idea that we have to analyze each of our calls, and what does it really do? And we're so busy as callers, and not everybody's going to be a full-time choreographer who spends all of their time doing that. But you're going to have to pick and choose things, and one of the best places for it is in your beginner's lessons. Because if your body flow is good, it'll help them. But it'll help you as you go. You've got to look at those calls anyway, and what are you putting together. So you might try looking at which way is the girl turning on this call, which way is the boy turning on that call. What way are they leaning? Is it okay to have the heads do a right and a left through and lead to the right? We do it all the time. I see it everywhere I go. Because we always want to do lead to the right from squared up set. Except that the body flow for the courtesy turn was completely to the left. But now we're going to veer to the right. Quick recovery, up, and I'm not impressed with the mentality of the caller that feels that it's fun to trick the floor that way. If that's the reason, if they understand the body flow and they think it's cute. A little of that kind of cute doesn't go very far in my book, and I think that's something we want to look at. But most of the time, it's really an unconscious thing. We're not trying to do it badly. We just don't think about it. So I think you need to look at that. Now, I want to talk about just for a second the programming factor here. When we have our dancers programmed, what do I mean by that? Swing through, spin the top, right and left through. Of course. Right? Swing through, boys run, couples circulate. There's not a thing in the world wrong with that when you're teaching our beginner dancers, because there's a security factor there. And they need to be secure. I know we talked about creative choreography the other day in this very room, and we commented on that, the excitement of not knowing what's coming next. But it can't be that way all the time. The dancers need to be secure and able to dance and move. And that's the thing we look for in our beginners. That's what helps bring them along to where they really are dancing, and they have that sense of dancing to the music. And as soon as it's jerky, the body flow's bad, and they're moving in opposite directions, they feel like perhaps they've done something wrong, and maybe they haven't at all. Maybe it's been presented to them in such a way that they feel wrong. Again, we're back to that word, how's it feel? And that makes a difference. The patterns that we set for the dancers are certainly worthwhile. We also need to be able to show them other patterns, though, from the same starting type formation, so that it's not always, every time, the same thing. And why do I say that? Because there are times when you may come in and present a pattern that is different than the one they're used to, that mechanically, having examined it, the body flow is perfectly acceptable. But they have become total pattern dancers. They always dance the same pattern the same way. So now the moment you change it, you've interrupted their programming, right? There's a momentary glitch. The synapse doesn't work the way it should. And consequently, right, it feels a little rough. And they'll come up and they'll say, gee, that didn't feel quite right. And I say, well, try it a few more times. We'll look at it. I think maybe it's because it's new to you. So when you're going to be getting away from, quote, standard or very familiar patterns, even if the mechanics of the body flow are acceptable, you want to be aware of it. You might want to watch for a cue or a little warning hint to the dancer, like, it's going to be a little different, something along that line. Let them know. It would help you. The last thing I'm going to touch on here, because I'm just about out of time, a couple of mechanical things that do make a difference. Disorientation of the dancer in the square. Now, sometimes it happens from what we call overflow, where they've been asked to go, and there's varying evaluations of what's overflow. Is more than 180-degree turn overflow? Is 360 overflow? I think that's an evaluation thing. Myself, I feel that anything over 360 certainly is, and perhaps many things, depending on what the following call becomes or the preceding call becomes, could get us into that factor. And that's disorienting. It's almost dizzying right? And once the dancer's lost that orientation factor, they have a problem. Touching hands is a great thing to get our dancers to learn to do so they know where they are. Are they centers? Are they ends? Not that they have to recognize it by title, especially in our beginning dancers, but that they feel secure. That hand touch is a big help. Disorientation takes place if I have the dancers in a tidal wave, and we've been doing something, and I suddenly say, center 4 only, and there are people looking up and down the line and trying to figure out who those center 4 are. That's tough. And what you've done is change the orientation from the tidal, from everybody, down to just these, and these other people are involved in something else, and it's not them, oh no, not you. That's harder to do. Things that change the axis, especially things that change the axis quickly, and by that I mean if we are looking at the square running this way, front to back in the room, and suddenly the next call is going to change it to running the other way. Touch a quarter does that. Curlicue does that. Spin the top does that. Cast off 3/4 does that. Anytime we're doing axis change calls, the dancers are changing their orientation. Every time we ask them to change their orientation from centers to ends, it becomes something different, especially with our new dancers. Especially when we're teaching our new people to come along. Now I've just changed my identity, my orientation. I'm no longer a center, now I'm an end. That's all part of their learning process over a period of time. But we want to make sure that anytime we're doing axis change calls, that we are aware, right, that the dancers have perhaps the need of a moment to figure out where they are, a second, whatever. Again, touching of the hands helps them recognize where they are. The situation that we're confronted with on an ongoing basis is how to make the dancers win. That's what every one of us cares about. That's what all of us talk about. And every time we talk about how to do that, we keep coming back to training ourselves as callers, making us more flexible, giving us more information to take back to help our dancers win. I'd like you to look at some of those things that we've talked about this afternoon, especially the body flow, because that's my little baby, because I think it does a lot of damage. It turns out a lot of dancers that are very tired and come away fatigued from the night. Not only is it bad enough that I have to go, but when I'm done, I'm whipped. And the next day, I have problems. And the people who have knee problems and ankle problems, and it affects all of them. And it's very much a factor in our dancing and our teaching. Give some consideration to those types of things when you're teaching them, and I'll be glad to talk with anybody when we have a chance in the halls about other ideas of what makes things hard. But those are some of the main things that we want to talk about. Thank you.
I'm going to be talking about ways that you can teach a new call, whether it's to a new dancer's class or in a workshop or at a party dance, whatever. These are some of the principles that are very important to know if you want to be maximally effective as a teacher. And when I talk about effective, I mean that an effective teacher can teach material, cover more material in less time than an ineffective teacher. An ineffective teacher or a less effective teacher takes more time and often hasn't covered the material as well. And we're working to try and become more effective, particularly with the amount of material we have to teach. I have a demonstration square over here, and I'm going to use them to help me. I'll try to talk to you as I go through some of these things. I'm going to actually demonstrate teaching one call and try to give you the principles that I'm following and using as I go through them. I have almost all this written out for you on handouts, and there'll be 2 handouts available. I have enough for everybody here. So at the end of the session, I'll give those to you. Okay, you guys will square up. And just for purposes of the audience, you guys come over here at 4 and you listen number 1. The audience will be able to follow the square better. Now, what we're going to do is take this group, and I don't want them to act or anything, just do things naturally. We're only going to demonstrate, not try to really play. And they are at the point where after about 6 lessons, tonight is the night to teach them the grand square. So we're going to deal with that and try to follow some of these principles that I've talked about as we teach them. Some of the things that have happened prior to me getting here, I've spent a lot of time at home preparing for this lesson. I know a couple of important things about teaching. Number one, that if I'm going to teach a number of different things during a given evening, The thing that I teach the very first, during the first part of the evening, is in the prized position to be remembered. Of all the things I teach all night long, whatever I did first will be the most likely to be remembered. And the most interesting thing about that is that the second best position for teaching something new is what I do last during the evening. And the thing that is most likely to be forgotten among all the things I do during the night will be that taught just past the halfway mark of the evening's program. Recognize one other thing up here. Some people who aren't teachers look at this and they see one square of dancers. But a teacher looks and they see 8 very different people. So to make this even more graphic, let's pretend that here we have a sports car, and here's a bicycle, and over there's a forklift and a motor home and another bicycle and maybe an old pickup truck, an airplane, and here's another motorcycle over here. If you really think about that, there's that big a difference among the human beings who join me in my one square. And I have to recognize that they have very different learning rates. Research indicates that within that one square, I probably have a learning rate spread of 1 to 5. That means if my sports car learns the grand square in 5 tries, then some one other person here is going to need 25 tries to learn it as well as this person. I can tell you that before I start my class. Now, the one person I don't have to worry about is the forklift, because the forklift has had an excellent introduction to grand square in a physical education class 25 years ago in his school system. And he already knows the grand square, and because those people taught him to dance it in 32 beats exactly, he has no problems with the center swings and all the habits I don't want this group to develop. So he already knows the call. But he's going to be refreshing it because he hasn't done it for 25 years. Okay? Now, I want all of your help. Clap your hands in rhythm for me so I don't have to go back over and get a phonograph. Thelma, could you put the records up on the table for me just a minute? Okay, everybody about this tempo, go. You're going to be my music. We're going to take a very brief warm-up just to refresh the other 19 calls that I might use tonight. Everybody join hands, circle left, round the land, circle left, all the way around. Keep going, you're doing good. Circle right the other way, walking, talking round to say all the way. Notice the nice shuffle step, the proper hand positions. Everybody face your corner, alum and left. Come back, go right and left, grand, hand over hand, all the way around. Meet your own and promenade, hands crossed. All the way around to get back home, and when you're home, square your set. Thank you, band. Very good. All right. Now, I don't want to spend much time on that. All I want to do is make sure they're not going to forget the calls I'm going to use to support the grand square, because I don't want any confusion about anything else. The only thing new in what I'm going to teach is the grand square. All right. Now, the grand square has 2 rules. And if you know those 2 rules, then you can do as many as 20 different variations of grand square, all of which you've learned once you know the 2 general rules. These are the 2 rules. Side couples face your partner. If you are standing close enough to the one you're facing to reach up and touch hands easily, when I say walk, you back away. If you're across the square so you can't easily touch, when I say walk, you walk together. You're going to walk 4 steps and stop. Ready? Walk. 1, 2, 3, 4. Walk. 1, 2, come on, go. 2, 3, 4. Let's try once more. Ready? Walk. 1, 2, 3, stop. Walk. 1, 2, 3, stop. And now it's very important that all of my folks get that down so they aren't confused by it. And if it does confuse somebody, we'll take another minute and go over it again, but they're ready. Rule number 2. If you are facing your partner and I say turn, you turn to face the opposite. Everybody point to the opposite person. Opposite across the hall, all right? If you are facing the opposite and I say turn, you turn to face your partner. Everybody ready? Turn. Turn. All right? Now, we're set that we're going to try to put this together, and I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, turn. Ready? Go. 1, 2, 3, 4, turn. Walk. 1, 2, 3, 4, turn. Walk. 1, 2, 3, 4, turn. Walk. 1, 2, 3, 4, do not turn, and just square your set. Very good. Okay, you have the idea. Those are the two basic rules for grand square. Now there's another thing that enters in here. I want continuous motion. I don't want stop and go in an action like this. So as we practice, I've got to bring them to the point where they can move continuously since there is no interrupted action in this call. So I'm going to do that in slow motion. We'll do it slow at first. All right, this time I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, and say turn on count 4. And you keep in your mind that all turns will always be on count 4, 8, 16, whichever of those numbers I'm using, all right? Everybody ready? Sides face your partner. Everybody ready? Grand square. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, don't turn. Very good. Square your set. Heads face your partner. Everybody ready? Grand square. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3, and stop. Square your set. Now, we're going to go through this just a little faster tempo because before I use my first record, I have to bring my practice speed up to my dance speed. I can't teach something slow, then put on a fast record, or I'll destroy them. So now I have to work, and it may take me 2 or 3 more practices till I feel they're ready to dance at the record speed. Well, this time we're going to go through the whole thing. I'll keep you going through the full 32 counts. 2 and 4, face your partner. Everybody ready? Grand square. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, reverse. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, don't turn. All join hands. Everybody circle to the left. Go round the ring, halfway round, and when you get there, 1 and 3, face your partner. Everybody ready? Grand square. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, don't turn. Reverse. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, all face to the middle and circle left to home and circle left. Go round the ring. When you get back home, square your set. Marvelous. And you were able to keep dancing in rhythm while I gave you the next cue so I could do it on time. That's one of our big problems with a grand square. We almost always pre-cue a grand square, then try to change back to dancing out of phase as callers ordinarily call. I'll try to illustrate that, but we almost invariably do that, and it leaves you a little glitch if the dancers will not be disciplined enough to finish the grand square while you give them the next cue. Too many times they break and stop and start doing the next cue if you do that. All right? We're pretty well set, so now we're going to go full speed one time. 2 and 4, face your partner. Everybody ready? Grand square. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, now reverse. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3, and stop. Now, one last point, and you're illustrating this very, very nicely. If I don't give you another call prior to the time that you get home that asks you to adjust to the next call, be sure to end the same way you started, so that the side should be facing their partner and the head should be facing across the hall. If I allow you to finish this without giving you some other call, now if I should give you another call like circle left, then everybody blends into that new call in rhythm. But if not, I depend on you being in this position for my next call. All right? Any question from any of you? All right, we're going to give this a try. Where is that? Where is that? I have a particular affinity to this kind of music when teaching calls like this because the beat is solid and the rhythm is there, and it helps me with the next thing I want to teach. All right? Sides face your partner. Everybody ready now? Grand square. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, turn. 1, 2. Don't turn reverse. All join hands, circle left, halfway round the ring you go. Square your set, heads face your partner. Everybody listen, and here we go. Ahead because I'd spend more time with this, but now I want them to learn to hear in the music those cues so that they start listening to the music without me having to say them. They're going to still, they have to count silently and say 1, 2, 3, turn to yourself. But start following the music and listen to it as you go through that. Heads face your partner. Very nicely done. And again, I want them to be sure they all understand all the rules. A promenade means that if you start near home, you promenade 16 counts. You have to promenade at least 1/4 of a square unless the caller tells you to do something different. Caller tells you to do something different, fine, but dancers don't decide what you're going to do and not do. And the rule is that you promenade all the way around if you're near home. You did that. Perfect. I'm running out of time here, and so in terms of being able to demonstrate some of these other things, let me just comment that the first 3 nights that I have this new call with my lessons, we'll be working on these kinds of variations, starting and ending with different ideas so they understand the grand square is not always doesn't always follow a circle or a chain, or the chain doesn't always follow it. I'll mix it up and do all kinds of different things, getting into it, getting out of it. But the grand square will still be the same, except starting the second night, then we'll do a half sachet position, so everybody learns to start a grand square from both the left and the right position within the couple. And those are my standard things that I'm going to work on until I build a big foundation. If you were teaching someone to drive a car, You'd want ultimately that they could drive a lot of different cars, but you're not going to give them a different car every night while they're learning. You're going to take one car and learn to drive it very, very well. Then you start doing variations. And we do the same thing. After the second night, for instance, we've done all of our grand squares in 18s. Now the next thing we do will be 1 into 16 counts. Side space, grand square, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. All join hands, circle left. Head space, everybody ready? Grand square, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and all join hands, circle half. The next variation may be the grand square in 8 counts. All of you think real quickly. What person do I have to start my partners with to grand square 8 to an Alaman left? Say it louder. You're right. Okay, everybody got that? Well, let's try that one. 4 ladies chain. 4 ladies chain, 3/4. Side space, everybody grand square 8. Alaman left with a corner and come on back, go right to left, grand. Hand over hand around the ring. Promenade your partner home. When you get back home, head space, everybody ready, grand square. 1, 3, turn, 1, 2, 3, turn, 1, 2. All join hands, circle left, halfway round. Reverse, single file, come back home. Well, you get the idea of trying to mix up the get-ins, the get-outs, but keep the grand square the same. And I'm starting my variations, and I'll go through at least 6 weeks of variations that are all very consistent with this kind of thing. I've got 1 minute left. Let me show you one variation that would come later on down the line. The head gent take the corner girl, go straight into the middle, and come way back. Side gent face the corner girl, walk together, touch both hands. Now remember rule 1. Let's practice rule 1. Remember, that's if you're close, you back away. If you're away, you walk together. Ready? Rule 1. Go. 1, 2, 3, stop. Just rule 1. Walk. 1, go together or back away. Yep. Rule 1. Now rule 2 is face your opposite or your partner. Rule 2 is turn. Turn. All right, let's go back. I'm sorry I got that confused. I was trying to say it too fast. Everybody get back in your starting position. Starting position there. Okay, head gent, take the corner girl, go into the middle and back. Sides face your partner, walk together, touch hands. Everybody ready? Grand square. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, an Alaman left with a corner. Come home and square your set. About the 8th or 9th week of this, since we started teaching this, we built our foundation, we would be getting into a few of these variations. Then later through the program, we'd get involved with more complicated ones. I'm out of time, and that's basically the idea. If you guys would sit down, how about a nice hand for the people that came to help? All right. Now, let's take time for some questions or comments from the floor or comments from anybody in the panel. Let me put this floor mic out here so they are tape recording.
Jack, during that grand square, not once did you tell the dancers where to put their hands.
And styling will be a very, very important facet of this. At the present time, it's difficult because we don't have the skirts for the ladies. But they would be instructed that the girls use they're both hands on their skirt with skirt work, and the men's hands are held in a normal position. And we would cover that styling ordinarily. You mean when you touch hands? Well, the rule from the styling directions are that the hands are held in a normal position, and there isn't anything, to my knowledge, about a touch hands or push off. That's something that does get into the grand square often, but it's not part of styling as far as I know.
Okay. Did you notice that Jack made the comment about X number of weeks down the road? Before he got into the last variation that he showed you, he said we would be further down the road. But did you notice what happened? The orientation was different for them. He chose another place to present using the same rules, but their orientation was different. He would have waited in his class situation until they were competent, comfortable, and had seen a lot of variations, but the one that starts to show a orientation different, head man, take your corner girl, move in, others turn to face. All of a sudden, we have a different orientation for the dancer, and it becomes harder. So we're tying all these things in together, but he placed it properly in his teaching plan to where they could see this, and still he's adding variety to his dance. I think it's a very important point about where you put that.
Somebody else have a question? We'd love to get into discussion about any of these presentations. We're talking about helping dancers to find square dancing pleasurable. And the key points out of this, teachers must teach correctly, and the learners must have sufficient time and instruction and practice to learn skillfully. Then they can feel tremendous about anything I want to do with a grand square. By this time, 9 or 10 weeks down the road, I'm almost ready to start some more complex variations from the ones we showed here. Okay?
I'm sure we all as teachers teach grand square much the same way you did, if not exactly the same method, but we teach them that there's 32 beats and you take 4 steps and turn on 4. And we start them off, I'm sure, by dancing beautifully, and somewhere along the line this all falls apart. I was wondering if you could identify that, because whenever I call grand square to any club, I don't care where it is, the dancers are finished in 16 beats, 28 beats, but they're always there waiting, and they're always there swinging. They do something because it fell apart.
Let me try to illustrate one of the causes of that. This is one reason that happens. I tried to indicate that we almost always pre-cue the grand square, so a dancer begins on phrase on beat 1 of the music. But as soon as we finish the grand square, the caller goes back to calling the way he ordinarily does, which means he starts saying what he's going to say on beat 1 of the music, and the dancer begins dancing when the caller finishes saying it. As an example, this is a singing call, and when I say grand square, I'm going to say it. Head, space, grand square. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 1, 2. Now notice, though, that I don't pre-cue what comes next. What happens in what you're talking about is that many callers do try to pre-cue. And because the dancers aren't used to dancing at that, they interrupt the grand square and begin dancing the next call as soon as they can identify it. As an example, again. Side space grand square. I said 4 ladies, they knew what I was going to say, and they did not continue to finish the grand square and wait till I finished talking. As soon as they identified my call, they interrupted the call and began executing it. And callers always time to the dancers out there one way or another. When they see dancers starting to do that, then they get further ahead, or further the other way. It takes discipline. Those dancers would have to be very disciplined to listen to me say, 4 ladies chain, and not interrupt it, but continue to dance, wait till they finished, and then begin on beat 1 of the phrase of the next beat. And I don't call on beat 1. All my calls for the figure are going to be like this. I don't pre-cue any of them. The head square through, 4 hands around you go. Go round the corner, do sa do. You swing through and down, now 4 run right. You Ferris wheel. I haven't pre-cued any of them. I start my calling on beat 1 of the music instead of having the dancer start on beat 1, and the dancing begins on about beat 3 or 4. Now that's one of the major reasons for what you're talking about. That is inconsistent, and it's awfully hard to deal with. Grand square is almost the only figure in square dancing that most callers pre-cue. They interrupt and pre-cue, and then they go back to cueing off on phrase, an off phrase. Go ahead.
That was beautiful, the way they did the grand square. But even there, a couple of times when you stopped counting, a couple of them got off the beat. Grand square will never be solved, Jack, because it's not keeping beat with the music, it's contra. You've got to feel the 4 beats of every side of that square from within you. They can do the beat. They can stay with the beat of the music, but still shortcut the grand square. See what I mean? It'll never be solved.
Well, you and I have a different feeling about that because my dancers will dance it in beat.
Oh, sure.
By the time I'm 8, 10, 12 weeks down the road, and I've enforced both my calling and their dancing, they're going to be on the beat with it.
But how many
that's
dancers?
not going to happen if I do what I just illustrated. If I pre-cue that and then don't pre-cue my next calls, if they don't discipline themselves to finish the call before they start the next, then we'll be off in the pattern.
No, the dancers just don't feel the 32 beats. You have to feel that from within you.
Let me offer one other suggestion.
Okay.
If I use all these variations John was talking about, I'm going to use a grand square 6. I'm going to use a grand square 8, a grand square 16. I'm going to use head gent and the corner girl. And I'm going to use a lot of other variations I know that they now can do all of as we get to the point where they'll accept the variations as consistent with the rules I taught them. That's what I have to get over with John's saying, is when I put the head gent and corner girl forward and back, they don't visualize that as consistent with the rule I taught. It takes them a little while to see that I can do all kinds of variations that are consistent with the rules, so all I have to do is think about what's the rule and follow it, and they can do all these without ever learning them. So if I teach that way, they're going to stay on that beat.
It isn't the beat though. It's the phrase. It's the counts. The 4. Anyway, can I go to what?
Yep.
Okay, on choreography, John. A lot of really good callers, and a lot of times in singing calls, the second one, star through, veer to the left, fine for the man, terrible for the girl, reversal of body flow. Lots of singing calls. Heads touch a quarter, walk and dodge, terrible for the dodger. That's in so many singing calls. Boom, boom. Oh, a curly cue, I call touch a quarter. I don't like it. But on singing calls, so many are the heads touch a quarter, walk and dodge, circle. Well, that dodger's going body reversal again.
Any other questions or comments? Yes.
Just a quickie on the timing. If you put your ladies' chain in between the grand square, when you start your grand square, go your first half, put the ladies' chain. Now, they will, if they're rushing you, they will have started. Now, this is kind of entrapment. But if you do it one time, I promise you, the rest of the night you call grand square, they'll do the whole 32 beats. And then when you get back, just finish your grand square.
That's a good point. And if you do that consistent with the first 3 or 4 nights that you teach it, you won't have to trap them with it. They'll just do it.
I've been to timing school, and for the love of me, I can't understand how you can cue them on the beat. I would necessarily say that you would have to pre-cue side, face, grand, square, then the beat goes. Otherwise, you're not timing.
Maybe I didn't make my point. That's what callers do with grand square. You don't have to do that. They could dance it off phrase. But that's what they do with it, but they don't call the next call the same way. They change to a different calling pattern with the next call. You're not following that with me? Okay, well, I'll tell you what, I don't want to take everybody's time unless you have want to follow that or pursue it. Somebody else have another question, and then I can talk to you. Let's get together afterwards, and I'll try to be more clear or understand that. Maybe John can explain it. Okay, anybody else have a question? Comment? Let me show you with our dancers. One of the things that's fun about being a teacher is the necessity to prepare for your class. And I learn from everything. I learn from these dancers up here. I learn from my preparations. And I found a whole new grand square in preparing for this that I've never done before or ever seen before. But I think that knowing those rules and being consistent with them, they would dance it correctly the first time very easily. So let me try it on them and see what happens. Square it up and... It may very well be some others of you have done this before and seen it before, but I haven't. And I want to review the two rules because it's important that you keep those in mind. You're dancing them beautifully, but I just want you to be consistent. Sides face your partner. Everybody ready? Grand square. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3, turn. Square your set. If you're close, you walk away, you back away. If you're far, you walk together. If you're facing partner, you turn to face opposite. If you're facing opposite, you turn to face partner. All right, here we go. Let's see what happens. Heads promenade, 3/4 round the ring you go. Inside you face, everybody ready? Grand square. 1, 3, turn 1, 3, turn 1, 3, turn 1, 2, don't turn reverse. 1, 3, turn 1, 3, turn 1. Swing in the center, face the outside 2 and then. Now wait a minute. Now see, that's because these two rules are new to them, and this is the first experience. And I wouldn't use this until 8 or 10 times down the way after they'd learned to apply those rules. But square your set. You can get the idea that that would work, but you didn't finish it properly. Want to do one quick time more, just to see it? I'll stop you this time. See what happens. Heads promenade, 3/4 round you go. Inside, space your partner. Everybody ready, grand square. 1, 2, 3, 4. No, you got to go one more. You win. You can see what John is talking about. See, now I put them in a position where we did not have adequate practice to learn to apply the rules, so now this is hard and confusing. But it should be a cinch, very simple. If I had in my class, by the time we do this, it'll be a cinch, no problem. Okay, well, I thank you very much for trying that. I learned I have to go back and take a little more time with it. Jack? Well, that record is one of mine, Square Dance Time, Grand Square 6 quadrille. The other one is Gordo's quadrille, same thing, and then When You're Smiling. All those are Square Dance Time records. The last one, Gordo's quadrille. Okay, this one is Grand Square 6 quadrille, which is a neat one, and there's a brand new Grand Square 6 record out that's super. I'll show it to you. This is Grand Square 6 quadrille, record number 009 on Square Dance Time. This one was When You're Smiling, and that's 007 Square Dance Time. This one's Gordo's quadrille, and that one is 002 Square Dance Time. I've been putting out a number of those because I love those to teach with and enjoy them. But here's a super brand new singing call. Square it up just for fun so they can all see how smooth this works. There's a brand new record called Walk Tall on Rawhide. Well, four little ladies chain 'em 3/4 round, you know. Turn a girl and chain 'em, go straight across that ring. Turn a girl in side space, grand square, and then 6 steps down and left with the old left hand, right or left ring. Grand, go right or left, go round the ring, you know. Swing your honey round and promenade her home. Promenade around that ring, walk 'em right in the eye. Walk tall, walk straight, look the world right in the eye. Neat, and it really works, and it picks up every time. Gee, I haven't had a floor miss it yet. Thank you. Okay, anything else that anybody wants to discuss? Our time is almost out. Thelma, could I get you to... Oh, Thelma's gone. If I can get somebody, maybe my wonderful square up here, give them a big hand for doing that. That was a lot of pressure. Thank you. If you wouldn't mind helping, maybe you could help us hand out all these handouts here, and be sure that